And so I was hoping you could speak to like how exactly you've gathered enough evidence to make the case in your book that animals do have culture like humans like human animals have culture, and maybe we can start by if you could define what culture exactly means in this context first.
Yeah, I think first of all, defining it is the most important thing before we know what we're talking about.
Okay.
But I also want to just comment on something that you said about the information that we have and what we know and what we don't know. On my first day of the class that I teach for graduate students, I ask, what is the value of an education? And you know, a few hands go up and they all say knowledge, or to get a good job, or to learn things. And what I tell them is that at this point, what I think the value of an education is to begin to understand how little we know. That to me is the value of an education.
Amazing.
But so let's talk a little bit about culture. With humans, we say culture is fashion and movies and art and religion and sports and technology. That's culture. And actually, that's not culture. Those are products of culture. What culture is the answer to the question of how do we live here? That's what culture is. And to make that a little bit clearer, one of the most obvious cultural things is our language. Humans are born with a behavioral capability to learn a human-type language. But whether we speak Italian or English or Vietnamese or whatever is strictly a matter of what we are taught. And that's what culture is. Culture is the ideas, the values, the preferences, the skills and knowledge that flow socially. It's what we get from others. So we get language from others. We get religion from others. We get our fashion from others. So the value of culture is to give us what it takes to survive in a place physically and socially. So socially meaning how you speak. I mean, if you don't understand the same language, you'll have a hard time communicating. If you don't dress like everybody dresses, you will look weird and stick out, even though what looks weird to us in other people's dress is what's natural to them, and how we are looks weird to them, right?
Right.
And then the other part, so that's the social part, and then there's just the survival skills part.
Well, let's try to make this more specific if we can. So let's take something like the strong cultures like a French or Italian culture, because people would say, okay, the culture in Italy would be under food or artisanry, art, things like that. And so maybe you could delineate where you think it is culture and where it isn't in one of those like very knowable countries.
Right, right. Well, first of all, that's all Western culture. I mean, there's a lot of commonalities, and culture is sort of a nested thing. So,
Okay.
Western culture has a lot of commonalities. We all more or less look and dress the same. We have the same sorts of, well, many of us are brought up in the same religion, or at least in the Christian tradition, and if not, almost certainly in the Abrahamic tradition, either Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are some similarities that we all share culturally, but we get all of those things from other people. We were taught those things. They're not things that come to us naturally, and they answer the questions of how we live here. So if you are raised Christian and you go into a mosque, you don't really know what to do, right? If you don't speak the same language, you have a hard time communicating. And there are certain things, matters of etiquette. In some countries, if you point your toes in the direction of somebody else, it's considered to be rude. We wouldn't know that, but if we were brought up in that culture, we would just do that as a matter of course. If you went to a Buddhist temple, you wouldn't even know what you were looking at. So these are some of the kinds of things that have to do with how we get along and interact socially. One of the main things that does is it lets us cooperate. We all understand the expectations. If you go to work for somebody in our culture, you expect money in exchange for your efforts. If they try to pay you with goods, you will probably say, what's going on here? This is wrong. This is not what I expected. You're trying to cheat me. But in many cultures throughout most of human history, that would be the medium of exchange. Is I would do something or I would give you something. You would give me some goods rather than
Okay, so
money.
you're looking at this more as all human culture of how we relate to each other and survive on this planet. So how would people refer to something that they colloquially would refer to as culture? Like, oh, I love the French culture around food and wine, for example.
Well,
The British culture.
that's part of French culture is French food, French wine. Music is part of culture, and that varies from place to place or even generation to generation.
Okay.
It helps us understand who we are because we identify with others, and it gives us certain assumptions about how to act and how to cooperate with others. So those are some of the social aspects of culture. It answers the question of how do we live here, and the physical aspects have to do with things like, well, here's a good example. If you're raised in an indigenous tribe in the Amazon rainforest, you will know how to survive in the Amazon rainforest. If you're raised in the Arctic among traditional Inuit people, you would know how to survive in the Arctic. Take somebody raised in the Arctic, drop them in the Amazon, they'll be dead in a few days. Take somebody from the Amazon, drop them in the Arctic, they'll be dead in a few days. Either of them could have been raised in either place and known how to survive. But they learn the culture that answers the question, how do we live here? And it allows you to survive in a place. So that's a sort of an overview of culture and humanity. But it's similar in other species that have culture. The humans are the most cultural. There's no question about that. But up until a few years ago, a lot of people insisted that culture was only a human thing. And now what we know is that there are a bunch of other species, certainly not all, but a bunch of other species for whom learning how to live in a place is crucial to their survival. So let's start with the most cultural other species, which is chimpanzees. Imagine if you got a baby chimpanzee, you nursed it, raised it in a human home, and then you took it to the best chimpanzee habitat remaining in Africa, where wild chimpanzees live, and you left it there. It would not know anything about what to do. It would not be able to know where the food is, what to eat, how to get it, where the water is, what food to look for in different seasons. It would certainly not know how to interact socially with other chimpanzees. So what does a chimpanzee need to learn culturally? Everything. And that's why their childhood lasts about as long as ours. They're basically always with their mother until they're 9 years old or 10 years old or something like that. Right. And then they have a bit of an adolescence, and then they become adults in their mid to late teens, very similar to human beings. But everything they need to know about how to survive, they have to learn socially, first from their mother, and then by watching their mother interacting socially with other chimpanzees, and then watching other chimpanzees in their group and in their community to understand what is status about. How does a male, if you're a male, how does a male negotiate the social hierarchy? What do females do? What is the social life of females? How does it differ from males? Because it does differ a bit. And there's also culture in certain whales and dolphins. There's culture even in certain birds, in a number of mammals that live in groups. So we're starting in the last few decades to just learn that culture is very important to survival, not just in humans, but in other species as well.